In 2007, Steve Jobs unveiled the iPhone, and little did he know that he had set off a sequence of events that would lead to the death of art. Hi everyone, welcome back to the Ministry of Guitar. I want you to think about the most popular musician of the TV age, the initial TV age, and the most popular musician of the smartphone age, the initial smartphone age. The initial smartphone age is now, so I think we can safely say it's Taylor Swift, like her or dislike her. Of the TV age, you'd probably say it's Elvis Presley, because whether it's the Beatles and everybody who followed the Beatles, everybody can kind of trace their inspiration back to Elvis Presley. What is the difference between Elvis Presley and Taylor Swift, apart from the fact that I much prefer Elvis Presley? Well, the difference is, both you could say are mass musicians, popular musicians, huge impact to popular culture. But there is one thing that Taylor Swift is that Elvis Presley isn't. Taylor Swift is a business case study, not because of her manager, but because of herself, because of the strategies that she did when she was upcoming. There's a whole list out there of Taylor Swift and how, more than being an acute artist, she's also an acute businesswoman, an acute strategic thinker, so on and so forth. Right? Like her or dislike her, it's a fact. She has been very strategic in the way she has become the biggest musician in the world. Elvis, well, he had Colonel Parker. Elvis did whatever he could, but he didn't have a clue about business. In a way, Elvis was really an artist, while Taylor Swift is of course a great musician, but there is something that is implied in the artist of being rather uncommercial, rather amazing at your art, but perhaps not so great at these mundane matters that are typically reserved for people and men in suits. Right? So there's that difference. And the thing is that when you look at the modern era, more and more as you look at some of the people who are upcoming as big musicians, what you'll realize is they may be great at music, but they ain't half bad at being a businessman or a businesswoman, either a social media influencer either. They are extremely diverse, they are extremely competent across the board. And which almost begs the question, are they really artists if they are really suits in disguise? But why is this happening? In my opinion, all of this can be traced back to Steve Jobs' smartphone. Some would say it can be traced back to the internet, but I'm going to tell you why it can be traced back to the smartphone. What did the internet do? The internet connected the world. So anybody in the world could interact and communicate to anybody else in the world, regardless of location. That's what the internet did. What did the smartphone do? The smartphone ensured that anyone could contact anyone else at any time. And that is the key. Because the moment you got a smartphone in your pocket, you suddenly became accessible 24/7. Even when the internet was invented, you were not accessible 24/7. You were accessible whenever you dialed up to the internet, whenever you went to the computer room, as I did when I was in university, or whenever it is that you got the opportunity to get next to a computer. But the smartphone changed that. Now, what happened when the smartphone changed that? What happens when humans are accessible 24/7? It means that what people realized is you can entertain them 24/7, you can talk to them 24/7, and you can sell to them 24/7. And what businesses were quick to realize, and which is why you had all this innovation, literally a flowering of the apps and businesses and startups, is they all figured out ways to sell to people 24/7, to create efficiencies in the marketplace simply because humans were accessible 24/7. Right? You can think of what Uber did, you can think of what Airbnb did. There's so much more. So what happens next? What happens when suddenly people can be reached 24/7, and if you catch their attention, you can make money? What happens then is that attention gets monetized, right? And the companies that are catching people's attention to either sell them something or make money, they get better and better and better at catching people's attention. This is where someone like, say, Google or a Facebook become very good in terms of figuring out what kind of content they need to feed their users so that they are staying on their platforms, and then ads can be sold to people on that platform. So attention suddenly becomes monetized. When attention becomes monetized, when there's money behind catching people's attention, companies and ads and people and businesses and everybody else becomes better and better at catching people's attention. What happens then? In the past, when somebody was listening to a piece of music or somebody was watching a movie, they were generally paying attention to that piece of music. They would sit down, put a record player, or go to a theater and watch a movie, or even in a TV, watching something on the TV. They didn't have a smartphone to look at and distract themselves with, right? They're kind of paying attention to television. That's why long format advertisements work. That's why longer formats kind of worked okay on television. But suddenly now, because the smartphone is your avenue to the person, the art, whether it's the film, whether it is the music, whether it is anything else, it is suddenly competing with hundreds of other things that are competing to grab attention. This is why you saw not only film evolve, because you could say that ultimately the content that people watch, which used to be long films and maybe 30-minute 30-minute TV shows, you still have these things. But ultimately, a big chunk of what people watch are 15-second shorts. Basically, things that are designed to grab your attention in an environment where everything else is competing for your attention. Music evolved in the same way. Music now is basically led TikTok first. Basically, whatever grabs people's attention on TikTok is generally the music that people are listening to, because people's attention spans become smaller and smaller. And we also saw the music industry adapt to this. And it was a great thing for the music industry, because what happened is, previously, when the music industry wanted to find somebody who was a talent, they had to go to a bar or wherever, a small cafe, and find the singer or whoever was doing well locally. And then they had to take a big bet on the person, not necessarily knowing whether the musician would succeed. The halls of record companies are full of people, some who made it really big and some of them who had their demos, who had their albums and didn't do anything. And basically the investment that the company put behind that particular artist who didn't make it is basically investment down the drain. But now what they realized is, hey, because of social media, because of the smartphone, people now already know, the record companies already know that, hey, this artist is doing well on TikTok, this artist is doing well on Instagram. They already have a following, so I can pick them up, and I'm kind of assured that I will have some return on my investment because they already have a following, they already have a fan base. So what does that mean? It meant that suddenly for the musician to get picked up by the record company, to get the big money put behind them so that they could become a big artist, because ultimately you could be an amazing musician, but you will not become big. You will not become Taylor Swift big or anyone else big, even normal big. You will not get that big without having a lot of money, marketing money, radio slots, placement put behind you, right? You need a lot of investment behind you to make it big as a musician, even if you're a great musician. Ultimately, the impetus became for musicians to not only be good musicians, but ultimately create a great social media following so that they could get picked up by the record companies. And say you wanted to remain independent, right? You don't care about all of this. And say you wanted to remain independent and you didn't want any of this. What choice did you have? Well, you had to find out a way to make money, because the music industry, because the internet and the smartphone had made the traditional avenues of making money, which is such as selling records, irrelevant. So you had to find other ways of selling your wares, essentially being a business owner, where the music is kind of your advertising, but then you sell them merchandise, you sell them gear, you sell them other things. Basically, the musician became a businessman. So all in all, if you look at today, how people are, how musicians are, you'll realize that beyond being musicians, they are also businessmen and women, they are also social media influencers, they are all of these things. So they aren't really true artists in the traditional sense. And that's why I say that the smartphone killed the artist. All right, folks, this is all for today. I'll see you tomorrow.